Hello, I'm Bethany Wiggin, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Climate Storytellers Summit. Joshua and I are coming to you from Princeton University's campus. And here on campus, we're also hosting an in-person watch party, a festival, and a Climate Stories magazine launch right after this live broadcast. I'm so happy you've decided to join us here online, along with some 2,500 other people around the globe. A few months ago, I pitched this idea to gather climate storytellers to Joshua. I'm a cultural historian and an environmental humanist, and I'm committed to training and supporting our imaginative powers to collectively envision and to enact climate stories worth living. I was thrilled when Joshua was game for this idea to gather folks working together across the humanities, across the arts and sciences. But of course, neither Joshua nor I knew exactly what such a gathering might produce. To my complete delight, our call yielded an extraordinary outpouring of interest and talent. You're in for a major treat in the next 2 hours. Over the past few weeks, the storytellers you'll soon hear from have rehearsed many times. They've made us laugh, they've made us cry, but most of all, they have demonstrated time and again that climate storytelling is a powerful tool to build climate literacy and to spark conversations about the changing climate's impacts on our lives and about what we want to do about it. I owe many, many thanks to colleagues at Princeton's High Meadows Environmental Institute and to others at my longtime institutional home, the University of Pennsylvania. But my biggest thanks goes to Yale's Joshua Lowe.
Thank you, Bethany. I'm Joshua Lowe, the Partnerships Director for the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. I want to join you in thanking Princeton's High Meadows Environmental Institute team, especially Hans Marsilio and Gabrielle Longholtz. This event would not be possible without them. At the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, we study how people think, feel, and act around climate change. Today, it may seem obvious why YPCCC cares about storytelling, but it wasn't always so. For a long time, the climate movement focused on what Montana Burgess of Neighbors United calls Factland. These messages meant that climate change was distant in people's minds, distant in time and distant in space. YPCCC's research showed that there was a better way, telling stories that connected the dots. I'm so excited for you to hear from today's storytellers. They will generously share compelling stories, what is working, and best practices. I hope you will match that generosity, that love, that compassion, and that with a spirit that they share. I hope you will learn from to be better climate storytellers because the next generation is counting on us. With that, it's my incredible honor to introduce Dr. Michael Mann. Dr. Michael Mann is the Presidential Distinguished Professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania, with a secondary appointment to the Annenberg School of Communication. For more than 25 years, Michael Mann has been one of the leading climate scientists, publishing research and scholarship on climate variability and extremes, paleoclimate, tropical cyclones, climate education, and policy. And he's an incredible climate communicator. Over to you, Mike.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks, Joshua. Thanks, Bethany. Thanks to the supporting institutions for this important event. Thanks to all of our speakers and this amazing online and in-person audience we have here tonight. It's truly an honor to be serving as the MC for this event tonight. Climate change, make no mistake about it, it is the defining challenge of our time. At a time when we have so many challenges, this is literally the greatest challenge that we face, and it's become all the greater with the adverse political developments over the last several months when it comes to support for meaningful climate action. More than anything else, we face a communication challenge in an era of AI and deep fakes and the widespread weaponization on online platforms by bad actors for the spread of misinformation and disinformation. All of this means that in this communication war, we must be even more effective with the tools that we have, and none is more essential than narrative and storytelling. It's our secret weapon, for it seizes upon both affective and cerebral brain circuitry. In other words, it targets both the heart and the head. Since the early days of our hominid ancestors more than 1 million years ago, we gathered around the fire and told stories, stories to inform, stories to entertain, stories to inspire. It is hardwired into our consciousness. And that's why we're gathered here today in physical space and in virtual space, to be inspired by climate stories, stories of hope and alarm and righteous anger and joy, stories that importantly inspire both urgency and agency. And so without further ado, our first presenter today is Princeton first-year student, Angela Osaibova. Angela, the stage is yours.
Taking time out to be at the summit, and thanks to the organizers. I want to share my first steps into climate storytelling that I took in Dr. Wiggin's climate storytelling course here at Princeton, and talk to you about my climate stories. I'm a freshman studying civil and environmental engineering, and in my first term, I enrolled in Dr. Wiggin's climate storytelling for climate action course. Before coming to Princeton, I'd given talks about environmental remediation techniques, and I felt comfortable discussing and debating topics about climate change and environmental justice. Yet still, homelessness loomed over a lot of these discussions. While I think of myself as creative, I couldn't really imagine or visualize a hopeful climate future. The climate storytelling course helped me to understand this imaginative deficit and to understand that I'm not the only one experiencing it. That class taught me about what theorists call the triple failure of the imagination. Our class worked to correct this failure and to train our imagination through writing, workshops, and interviews. I was able to break down many of the blockages that prevented me from being able to see the future that I actually wanted. For our seminar's last piece of writing, we wrote a letter from a future time that we think will be just and sustainable to ourselves in 2024. My letter is set in 2080, where the young narrator writes to their grandparents back in 2024. To me, the future I describe is far from bleak, but it has been ravaged by time and the impacts of our current climate trajectory. My letter is titled, "Thank You, Thank You, Thank You." I breathed for the first time today. The sky was a dim lavender peeking from behind the heavy rain clouds, and the rain was sweet. It tickled the center of my scalp before running off the bridge of my nose, and for the first time in a long time, I sit and experience this strange feeling. It's beautiful. I'm standing on the ruins of the I-95, right on the new coast of old America, and if you could see how the earth has taken it back, you would be stunned. The concrete stretches have given way to all kinds of twisted weeds, and the mile markers have been harvested for animal feeders and new high-speed rail tracks. About half a mile away, curious children are discovering the last remains of a faded Wawa billboard half sunken underground. They are discovering what it is like to live in capitalist America for the first time outside of their history textbooks. I'm in the last generation to know the old order and to live in the car-dependent, capital-indebted world that you tried so hard to end. For the first time, I take off my smog mask and breathe, and the air is sweet. It's musky, but for the first time in my lifetime, it is clear. Thank you. You told me stories of life in the 10s and 20s, and I couldn't believe you. I couldn't imagine snow or a time when April showers didn't consume entire cities. A time hung perilously between progress and regression, yet you individually were so unable to swing the dial. Because I'd never heard the calm of a swaying forest trail, I didn't understand why you fought. Because I had never lived, I couldn't fathom why you and your generation brought the global systems to their knees and rose them up, all with the dream that your next generation would have what you never lack. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Climate storytelling has enabled me to envision a future that I genuinely could not imagine before, a future that I know many of my peers haven't been able to imagine either. It's a future that we need to imagine in order to actually work towards it. Through my training in climate storytelling, I've been able to imagine it now. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hi, it's great to be with everyone. My name is Jessica. I work at Potential Energy, a climate and clean energy narrative change firm. This is our small but mighty team. We are a nonprofit founded about 5 years ago, and our goal is to accelerate the energy transition from a dirty energy system to a clean one. And we do that through marketing. Every day, all of us are probably bombarded with hundreds of messages from different organizations, each carrying explicit and implicit statements about who we are and how we see the world. And when it comes to marketing, you might think first of that show, Mad Men. But unlike the Mad Men, we're not just sitting around the room all day, smoking cigars and pondering ideas. What we do share with them is a deep desire to really understand humans, especially those who are different from us, and figure out how we can actually get them to care about climate change more, what makes them tick emotionally. We take a really data-driven approach to doing that, running experiments, analyzing the data, running some more experiments. And over the last 4 to 5 years, we've accumulated a ton of millions of data points around this, measuring every single piece of content that we've created to understand its impact. And what I'd like to share today are 3 essential components that we found to be really effective for telling climate stories. The first is simplicity. It's quite an alienating thing for most people to wake up in the morning and think, today my goal is going to decarbonize. A lot of the scientific and technical jargon we use, like net zero and 1.5 degrees, are really foreign to most people and don't know what it means, what it implies, how it relates to their everyday life. Even the fundamentals around climate science and the role of fossil fuels in extreme weather tend to be a bit hazy. So we really need to simplify the message to core ideas. One that has worked for us, we call 99% of experts. As most of us know, scientific consensus on climate change exists, but most people don't actually know that. And so we built a piece of creative on that concept, likening it to the analogy, if all the mechanics in your town told you needed to get new brakes, would you risk it? If all the doctors were telling you to get a mole checked out, wouldn't you do that too? And so if all the scientists are saying climate change is real, man-made, and only getting worse, shouldn't we all be doing something about it? Our research, as well as that from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications, shows that this core concept has an important role in helping people connect the dots. The second is accountability. Every story needs a hero and an antagonist, and one of the most powerful stats we've tested is the fact that just 100 companies are responsible for 70% of carbon pollution. Most people don't know that. It's new news. It's new news, and it triggers our sense of unfairness, and that actually there is someone that we should be holding accountable. Number 3 is humanity. And I mean this both in the existential way, but also in a really tactical way. Our most effective content features real humans dealing with the real impacts of climate change. And this is a simple concept we call more than a headline, with the subject looking straight at the camera and a voiceover that reads out news headlines about how Californians have been hit again and again by extreme weather. And this gets to the big why for climate change. In 2023, we ran a global study with nearly 60,000 respondents over 23 countries. And the big consistent why we found wasn't really about economic growth. It was more relevant to talk about air and water pollution or extreme weather. But by far, the most consistent reason people wanted to care about it was to protect the future for the next generation. And this was true across gender, income, education, and even political ideology. And we took that and we really boiled it down to this idea of love, that we want to protect the people and places we care about. So the last piece of content I'll share today, we ran on the Super Bowl earlier this year, which we made in partnership with several climate scientists who are also parents. When we interviewed them to understand what got them motivated every day to keep doing climate research, their answer was pretty simple. I felt like I owed it to my kids. So when we analyzed the data afterwards, we saw overwhelmingly positive sentiment. And I think most importantly, it helped people see that they weren't alone, that others cared about this too. So whether you're a parent or not, we hope this core message resonates with you.
As a scientist, I know by the time she takes her first breath, 9 billion more tons of carbon pollution will be in the air. When she takes her first steps, wildfires will have burned millions more acres she could have explored. By the time a child born today goes to college, it may be too late to leave them the world we promised. Our window to act on climate change is like watching them grow up. We blink and we miss it.
When I was a child, my Colombian parents made sure to ask me many questions, big and small. They were curious to know what I was afraid of, what I desired, and what I dreamed of.
My communication with my Vietnamese parents looked very different. They showed their love by providing for me, they fed me, and made sure all of my needs were taken care of. But words were scarce in my household.
As filmmakers, we typically consider words secondary to images. The maxim in our field is show, don't tell. They say an image is worth 1,000 words. Yet when it comes to telling stories about heat, the rule falls apart. Heat is notoriously difficult to visualize or even to film. So how do we tell stories of extreme heat without merely focusing on catastrophic outcomes?
In our short documentary, A Fragile Vessel, we follow one family's walk into the woods. Under the cool shade of the trees, Irma and Armando ask their children questions like, what is heat? And what happens to your body when you're experiencing all of that heat?
The family shares field notes about what it's like to navigate the rising temperatures in Texas, both as individuals and as a family. And at first glance, their dialogue might feel overly simple. Yet what we're witnessing here is nothing short of remarkable. We're watching a family make sense of their lives as they experience ever-increasing temperatures.
According to Jeff Goodell, the author of The Heat Will Kill You First, our cultural awareness of the risks of extreme heat is extremely rudimentary. Heat is something that we often take for granted.
Which means that learning how to talk about extreme heat becomes more important than ever. Heat kills more people in the US than all other natural disasters combined. It's why it's known as the invisible killer.
In Texas especially, we know that it is hot. Our cities have been built to avoid that heat, with air conditioning providing cheap, cold air. Talking about heat can often feel redundant.
In the dark Castañon living room and around their dinner table, I had many conversations with them over months. We shared our own experiences living through the hottest summer in Austin. Armando, the father, shared that he gets blisters if he's outside for too long. JJ, the son, revealed that he can't even get into his car during summers because it basically becomes an oven. We all shared that being stuck indoors during the hottest summer on record in Texas, all of us felt our mental health suffer.
It was during these many conversations that we had with the Castañon family that we had such an aha moment for our film. We found that the way that they spoke to each other was so unique in the fact that it was so tender, it was intimate, and it felt like the glue that defined their resilience. We saw a mom asking her children how they were dealing with climate change in such a tangible way that took climate change outside of an abstract notion. We knew we needed to show this dialogue in the film.
So in order to do that, we took a storytelling gamble. We chose to do away with the traditional storytelling narrative arc and excluded any expert scientific voices. We used music, color, and the contrast of light versus dark, interior versus exterior to set the stage for this critical conversation.
And interspersed between the family's dialogue, we highlight both man-made objects and natural elements that we typically associate with heat, such as candles, stoves, air conditioning, water, and even the sun. And all of these objects gain a different charge when viewed through the perspective that heat is an everyday threat to this family's safety.
By modeling what it's like to talk about heat, this family becomes a reference point for our own families and communities. Ultimately, they're helping us to create a common language to navigate the uncertainty of climate disaster.
And as storytellers, we hope that by witnessing a family having a climate change conversation, it can be a spark for audiences worldwide to have their own conversations. Storytelling doesn't become a one-way window, but in fact, it helps create mutual dialogue. And it can help model for us what we may or may not have learned growing up. And as temperatures continue to rise all around the globe, it is our capacity to speak to our neighbors and our communities that will be the key to our survival.
Hi, my name is Renee, and my presentation explores how youth-led climate activism challenges pessimistic narratives and has transformed my perception of what activism truly means. I remember the first time I came across climate denialism, not just online, but from people in my own life. I've heard things like, oh, climate change isn't that bad, or what can one person even do? And honestly, I get it. The scale of the crisis can feel overwhelming, and it's easy to feel small and powerless. But I refuse to believe that we're helpless. That's why I turned to storytelling, using eco-poetry and investigative journalism to push back against apathy and misinformation. Through my environmental initiative with the Canadian Youth Climate Action Team, I've worked to develop a climate education department dedicated to creating investigative journalism videos that make climate literacy more accessible, helping young people understand the issues and, more importantly, see the solutions. At USDG Youth, my team and I work to organize an event that bridges the arts with environmentalism, inviting musicians to create music using recycled materials and poets like myself to share their environmental stories. Last month, I worked with students across my province to meet with Member of Parliament Talib Noor Mohammed to discuss and promote new environmental policies that support marginalized communities, youth development, and climate education. I feel empowered to involve myself in these initiatives because action is already happening. Youth activists around the world are proving that youth voices matter, that creativity is a powerful tool, and that hope isn't naive, it is necessary. Because the future isn't something we wait for, it is something we create. From my experiences with activism, here are 3 core lessons I have learned. First, a just and sustainable future means a world where everyone has access to clean air, water, food, education, and opportunities, regardless of where they live, how much they make, or their background. Right now, we see that climate change and environmental destruction hit marginalized communities the hardest, even though they've contributed the least to the problem. A just future flips that imbalance by making sure solutions don't just benefit the wealthy or powerful, but actually support those most affected. To shape that future, we need large-scale systemic change. Governments need to hold corporations accountable for pollution and exploitation. Policies need to make sustainable living affordable and accessible. And we need to stop treating environmental and social justice as separate issues. A just world is one where sustainability isn't a privilege, it is a given. Second, local action is powerful, but it has to be done with intention. If we are not careful, some sustainability efforts can actually make inequalities worse. For example, if we only focus on expensive eco-friendly products or solutions that require a lot of time and resources to access, we leave out the communities that can't afford them. It is not fair to expect people struggling to pay rent to prioritize buying organic groceries or switching to solar panels when those things aren't financially realistic for them. Building meaningful community-based solutions means shifting away from a charity mindset to a justice mindset. It's not about helping people in a way that makes us feel good. It's about recognizing where power imbalances exist and actively working to redistribute resources, funding, and decision-making power. For example, if we're working on a sustainable initiative, we should ask ourselves, who benefits from this? Who is being left out? And are we unintentionally reinforcing privilege? To make sure local action actually creates systemic change, we need to start by listening to the communities most affected. The people who experience these issues firsthand, whether it's environmental pollution, food insecurity, or climate disasters, know what they need better than anyone else. Instead of imposing outside solutions, we should support and amplify their voices. Third, it is really easy to feel overwhelmed when working in environmental activism, especially when so many of the problems seem massive and urgent. The climate crisis is global, but most of the work we do happens on a local, smaller scale. That is why we have to remind ourselves that every action, no matter how small, contributes to a larger movement. Every major movement in history started with small local efforts that built up over time. Another thing is to stay connected. Activism can feel isolating, especially when the challenges are so big. Finding a community, whether it's a local environmental group or an online network to share your goals, can make a huge difference. Lastly, it is important to take care of yourself. Burnout is real, especially when it feels like there's always more to do. The climate crisis is urgent, but we need people in this fight for the long haul. That means recognizing that it's okay to take breaks and step back when needed and rely on others. If we're going to make a lasting change, we have to build a movement that's sustainable, not just for the planet, but for the people fighting for it. That is my story. What is yours?
I'm Emily, and today I'll be talking about how we can make climate stories more effective by focusing on agency framings. These are particularly important in commercial media depictions in optimizing how rapidly we are culturally able to shift to climate solutions. As the Global Warming 6 America study demonstrates, audiences are becoming more alarmed about climate impacts, but people are getting stuck because they're unsure about how to participate in climate solutions. The concept of agency was developed by social psychologist Albert Bandura as a part of his social cognitive theory. Agency is the skill of being able to accomplish your goals. Climate stories can support people in being more effective at actions that they already want to take and establishing new cultural norms for climate actions. There are 3 types of agency: individual, proxy, and collective. Individual agency is what you can do for yourself, such as the individual choice of choosing what you eat. Collective agency is what you can accomplish as a group. One example of this is the Climate Change March, but collective agency can also look like a group of people collaborating on a shared task for many different roles, like reducing urban heat islands in a city, both by planting trees and by reducing low albedo surfaces. Proxy agency is what you can get someone to do for you, such as lobbying a legislator to create laws on your behalf, like this example of Congressman Panetta in a recent House committee hearing providing oversight. I often write letters to my legislators or meet with them to provide technical information on how climate change impacts health. Agency is achieved by setting short-term and long-term goals and periodically reevaluating to reach your long-term goals. Behavioral modeling of clear steps through stories, connecting audiences to linked resources for how they can participate, will increase our collective agency at implementing climate solutions. In every community, there are individuals or groups whose uncommon behaviors enable them to find better solutions to problems than their peers while having access to the same resources. The strategy here is to first identify the positive outlier behaviors and then amplify them. Linked resources are used to connect the narrative to activities that people can participate in their own communities. Suppose you are modeling characters planting trees in your story. In that case, providing a website that directs people to where they can plant trees in their own neighborhood is a type of linked resource. Some general trends arise in how we craft climate stories to maximize our ability to support climate action. I'm going to describe a brief overview of these categories: dystopian, health impacts, individual agency, and collective agency with linked resources. It's hot here in California, so I'll give an example related to heat waves amplified by climate change. Let's say you have a dystopian story about people dying from extreme heat in the future. It doesn't help us to prevent heat waves or respond to them effectively. The outcome that I want isn't people dying, so let's say that's not a great climate story. Health impact stories set in the present day can help people connect to the ways that climate change is already harming people's health. However, these should be some % of all the overall content, but they alone don't help people to know either how to prevent future harm or how to reduce the present-day health impacts. Now, let's take an intro with people suffering in the heat, demonstrate the health impacts, and build the story out so that a single protagonist seeks shelter in a cooling center, learns how to install a heat pump, and then assists vulnerable neighbors to install heat pumps. Then you have a good individual agency story. Now let's build on that some more, showing different characters working together in a variety of settings and roles to reduce urban heat islands by increasing green space and switching the city to renewable energy sources, in addition to the heat pump bit. That's a great visualization of collective actions being taken to mitigate and adapt to heat impacts. One last addition here. Take your collective action story with its specific and doable behaviors that people are demonstrating in your present-day city and add linked resources through social media connected to characters in your story where audiences can participate in the actions that are modeled. Collective agency with linked resources is the gold star example for how to best support climate action through narrative. We've now gone from bad to best, and repetition is helpful in social learning. So the more stories that we have reinforcing similar behaviors over more contemporary settings, the larger the impacts will have.
Adil katalino, bacuramit kasaruga, basingat kajubata, arus. Now close your eyes and imagine you listen to the wind, the rustling trees, and the heartbeat of the river. These are not just sounds, these are the voices of my ancestors, echoes of a land that existed long before us and must continue long after us if you protect it. My name is Jonathan Pertama from the heart of the rainforest, West Kalimantan, Indonesia. I am Dayak, guardian of the forest, child of the rivers, and I stand here not just as one person, but as a voice among many fighting to keep our identity alive. Our land is not just a place, it is our mother, our history, and our future. Without it, we are lost. Without our culture, we are silenced. And without recognition, we are erased. For generations, we live in the balance with nature, taking only what we needed and giving back in the gratitude. But today, that harmony is under attack. The trees that sheltered us are failing. The rivers that fed us are drying and our traditions are fading. And yet, we are still here. Some says we are people from the past, but what could be more relevant than protecting the earth? What could be more necessary than preserving wisdom that has sustained life for centuries? We are not recluse. We are the keepers of the future. Imagine what happened when a home is stolen, when a forest is cut down before the next generations can hear its stories, when a river is poisoned before a child can drink from its waters. This is not just environmental crisis. It is cultural erasure, historical theft, and violations of rights. Once they called it progress, but at what cost? Villages displaced, families stripped it on their land, elders mourning sacred places lost forever. They take our forests and live silence. They take our rivers and live ways. They take our stories and live absence. But silence is not our destiny. Our stories are resistance. As long as we speak, we exist. As long as we sing, we endure. And as long as we share our truth, we will never be forgotten. We fight not just for the land, but for memory, languages, culture, and for the rights we exist without fear. Our ancestors fought so we could be here. Now it's our turn. This is the reason why I founded the Patawan Talino Foundations to empower Indigenous youth through education, storytelling, and cultural revival. Because I believe when we reclaim our stories, we reclaim our power. Through films, we expose the truths they try to erase. Every frame is proof of our resilience, our refusal to be silenced. Our music is not just sound, but it's our identity, survival, and resistance. Because when we sing, we remember. And when we play, we declare we are still here. But this fight is not easy. We face threats from those who profit from our silence. We lack resources, but we do not lack courage. We face obstacles, but we do not turn back. This is bigger than the one community. The forest we protect give oxygen to the world. The wisdom we preserve holds answers to their crisis. This is not just Indigenous fight, it is a human fight. And that is why I stand before you today, because we cannot do this alone. We need allies, we need voices, and we need actions. You have power, please use it. Stand with Indigenous communities, speak against injustice, and support organizations that fight for our rights. Learn from us, don't erase us. Because the questions is not whether you can make a difference. The questions is, will you? I dream of future where our forests still stand, where our rivers run free, and our children grew up knowing who they are, not as reclicks, but as the builders of the future. We are Dayak, we exist, and we resist. We will never stop fighting, because fighting for our land is fighting for life, and fighting for our identity is fighting for justice, and fighting for justice is fighting for the future of this planet. So, if you believe in justice, human rights, and the protection of the planet, please stand, speak, and fight with us. Because I believe when we work together, we are becoming stronger. Saya agi kadek bukek diri, kami le agi kadek bukek ampaing. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? We can take actions. Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Sambut singkap.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marina Psaros, and I'm a climate resilience planner, an author, and a creative technologist. And Hans is running my slides for me today. So thank you, Hans. Could you please go to the first slide? All right. Imagine this. 3 billion people, all ages, nationalities, genders, education levels, socioeconomic background, everyone engaged in solving problems and collaborating with each other to make their world a better place. This isn't just one climate communicator's fantasy. This is the reality of the video games industry today. Video games are one of humanity's favorite forms of entertainment, and they're also a trusted messenger of information to their players and a major driver of culture globally. And this is where many climate storytellers want to be. As a climate change resilience planner in California, I've spent a lot of time working with people on hard, scary topics like how to protect their communities from sea level rise or wildfires. And I've found in my work that tools like video games, virtual reality experiences, and digital twins can spark people's curiosity and their imagination, help people share what's in their mind with each other, and give them a sense of their own agency. So I have got some advice, or in gamer speak, I've got some strats to those of you who are interested in exploring video games in your own climate work. Next slide, please. So first strat is don't assume that you need to build your own climate game. Building a new game from scratch is extremely resource intensive. Big AAA games can cost upwards of $50 to even $500 million. It takes years to get them built, and they employ hundreds of people. I'm assuming that most of us sadly don't quite have those resources to be able to do that, most of us at the summit. So instead, what you can do is partner with a game that already exists and create new modules or expansion packs for that game. This is, one of the greatest games ever, Sims Eco Lifestyle Pack, where players manage renewable energy and go about sustainable living as a natural part, an integral part of that gameplay. And the Eco expansion is actually very popular. It sold over 70 million copies, which makes it, in fact, the most popular Sims game ever. And there are lots of games out there. This mechanic of having expansion packs is really popular. It's very common. So for us here, it's more about finding a game where the game story has an authentic connection to your climate story. And, feel free to reach out to me. I can be a matchmaker. Second strategy, next slide, please, is to embrace what's unique about games. So unlike sports and movies, which are the two other big pillars of entertainment, or two of them, video games aren't meant to be spectated or passively consumed. They're built for active engagement, creation, mastery, learning skills. When you play a game, you expect to make important choices, and that those choices drive the narrative and the outcome of that game. And that mindset is exactly what we need people, how we need people to approach climate change, understanding that their choices matter and that their decisions shape our planet's future. What's looping now is C40 Cities. When they partnered with Minecraft for an urban climate resilience challenge, players didn't just learn about solutions, they built them by making digital twins of their communities that included climate safe infrastructure. And then players presented these designs to city officials to inform real world planning processes. Next slide, please. Make something fun and beautiful. Give your players something to look forward to. Have you ever seen a game advertisement that promises to make you feel sad and scared if you play? No, because no one is going to buy that game. But that is what a lot of climate communications winds up doing. And I don't mean to dismiss the real losses and the catastrophes that are happening right now and will continue to happen. But I do know that storytellers also need to provide hope. We need to paint realistically optimistic visions that people can get excited about building together. In the game that is on the screen now, called 2100, players design climate resilient cities, and it's not with a sense of desperation, but it's rather people are turning challenges into opportunities to create flourishing places where you want to be. The most successful climate games that I've seen and that I think will happen will offer beauty and community and agency. Next slide, please. So through video games, I think that we can find collaborators for our storytelling. 3 billion people, 3 billion climate heroes just waiting for their call to adventure. So thank you. Get in touch and let's play.
Hi all, my name is Neha, and I'm here on behalf of ClimeArts, which was created to hold space for the intersection of art and climate solutions, where feeling and action converge. ClimeArts is a platform that works diligently and sensitively to build partnerships between artists and experts to co-create jointly owned stories. Today, I'm happy to share one such powerful story that brings focus to a critical issue at the heart of climate change: migration. This story, woven together, comes from the verdant, fertile Indonesian highlands of Toraja through a fire-hearted woman named Dini Joseph. After a long career in banking, Dini returned with her husband, hoping to retire in his ancestral land. But what she found was unsettling. Cultural traces were fading, the land had lost its vitality, and a generation of women, mothers, were missing. Dini soon uncovered the deeper story. Most women had migrated for work. Many returned home only to give birth after facing abuse from employers, then left again, entrusting their babies to aging grandparents. Moved to act, Dini turned to the ancestral weaving tradition as a way to restore livelihoods, reunite families, and heal the land. Toraja Mello was born. Dini saw this endeavor as simply giving women back their rights, the right to be at home with their children, the right to earn a living to support their family free from abuse, and the right to creativity. Torajo Mello worked towards reversing the outward migration of the indigenous Torajo women and to bring back the source of income within their own communities. As women returned, so did dignity, so did ecosystems. Culture and land began healing together. 15 years later, Torajo Mello stands strong as a registered B Corp, a successful business and a model now scaling to the other islands of Indonesia. This beautiful story was brought to life through puppetry by Emma Cregan, an American puppeteer who lived in Indonesia, knew its rhythms, and understood how integral puppetry is to its folk art. Stories like this are powerful because they highlight the importance of Indigenous wisdom, caring for our culture, our interconnectedness with the land, and what can happen when these elements are disrupted. Validation of this story resonating with audiences has come from awards in various film festivals, and we are so grateful to be able to bring it to this prestigious forum as well. A brief video to follow. Woven Together is built on our framework that guides artist-expert collaboration. We foster trust and respect, ensuring stories that are evidence-based, truth-telling, emotionally potent, are ready to be shared with the world. Climates doesn't just document stories, we co-create them. We make space for transformation. Our latest project is a docufilm called Fragmented, where a ballerina in collaboration with Harvard School of Public Health explores the connection between Earth's cycle of decline and renewal and the physical and mental toll of dance, highlighting the resilience needed for recovery. We see climate change not as a singular crisis, but as a rupture in many stories: cultural, ecological, spiritual. Storytelling becomes a way to weave them back, truthfully, emotionally, and with imagination. So we listen, we collaborate, and we tell stories that might just help the future find its way back home.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Crean, and I'm an immersive theater maker and a game designer. And I create, among other things, interactive experiences about grief and eco-anxiety. And this is my pitch for you to invite me to your next game night. I'm kidding, unless you want to, in which case I love a game night, no pressure. With the full knowledge that the deck is a little bit stacked against me, I want to assert that working through our grief through play is possible, a good idea, not as scary as it sounds, and fun. I know that last one seems like a contradiction. And I also know that no one who made it to this summit is daunted by seemingly impossible tasks or unconventional solutions to intractable problems. The problem that I am currently working through in my medium of choice is a response to this question. How do we reinterpret this amorphous feeling that life and death happen to us? And this question, what would it be like to have agency over our own death? Immersive theater is an incredible medium for exploring the answers to these particular questions. It is a training ground for agency in that we enter into a fictional world together. We get to test out these new aspects of ourselves in this safe and temporary guided space, and then we leave. And there's tons of research around this that I don't have time to get into today, but there are a few key principles that are worth knowing about. And the best way to understand them, short of experiencing them for yourselves, is by example. So here is an example. This is a show that I wrote called Tea Party at the End of the World. It is a show that invites about 18 guests at a time to a tea party hosted by a character grappling with what it means to die someday. So totally normal, sort of cliche tea party. It's funny, it's interactive, and it is also deeply personal. There are 3 things I talk about in the show. One of them is my low-key obsession with loose leaf tea. The second is my dad, who died in 2016, who I grieve. And the third is my time at an artist residency up in the Arctic Circle. Most people hear that and they think, whoa, that is so cool. The residency bit, not the dead dad bit. And they are correct. It was one of the coolest things I've ever done. I had braced myself before going up there to feel really sad for weeks, knowing that I was going to this place that is this iconic image of a warming planet. What I did not prepare for was standing on this boat where the residency took place, looking up at a calving glacier, scanning the horizon for the next chunk of ice to fall into the sea, hoping I didn't miss it. I'll say that again. I was standing in the Arctic, looking at a glacier, hoping I would see it melt. Now that is an uncomfortable reaction then, and it is an uncomfortable reaction, we're counting it now, especially in this esteemed company, but it was so beautiful and so moving, and I was so happy to be there and also so guilty for being so happy, and also so full of obligation because it was my job as an artist to translate this experience into something worthwhile for others. And that is a lot of pressure to stop feeling happy and to do something serious. But I wasn't alone in the experience that I was having. Everyone on this ship was excited watching these glaciers move and melt, which sort of cut the shame off at the knees. And that's not a bad thing or a good thing, but it is a true thing and it is a complex thing. And this is what the show ended up being about. The fact that grief and joy coexist in really unexpected ways. And it is only when we try to separate them that we isolate ourselves and shame creeps in. And we don't do our best or most creative work when we are despairing or guilty or alone. We do it when we are in community, joking, playful, and seen. And when we can share our stories with strangers and sit together and sip and smell teas and explore where in our bodies we feel grief and hope. And when we can touch hands to the people next to us to practice how hard it is to reach out and how hard it is to let go in our bodies. And by embracing joyful uncertainty by playing a series of parlor games, sorry, tiny typo, no big deal, nothing to worry about. Parlor games that are made for this piece, things that ask us to consider who and what we would want to be present with us when we die, and how we might use our death for good far, far in the future. Because grief is a contact sport, and it is a team sport, and we need to train for it. We need experiences, immersive and otherwise, that help bring us into contact with others and our senses and our contradictions to process grief. With that in mind, let's take our last few moments to end on a high note by imagining our own deaths far, far in the future. Please feel free to close your eyes. It is the end of your world. Who is there? What do you see, smell, taste? If you're like me, what is your final tea? Is your death peaceful, or is it an act of resistance? Is it happening to you, or have you chosen this moment with care and communal support? Whatever narrative you have around death, your own, others, the planet, remember that it is shifting and changing, and it is okay if it is messy, and you are not alone. Thank you.
A warmer world is a more traumatic world. Because weather-related disasters are becoming increasingly frequent and severe, our exposure to death, serious injury, and other traumatic events is also increasing. That means we need new humanistic forms of climate storytelling that can help us recover from those environmental traumas and prevent them from happening in the future. This is the work of the Climate Disaster Project, an award-winning international teaching newsroom based at the University of Victoria. In the past, climate journalism has often focused on the impact climate change is having on our environment, our future, and what governments and technology can do about those impacts. So perhaps it's not surprising that the people actually impacted by climate change in the present are too often not part of those stories. But when someone experiences that kind of trauma, they need different voices and different stories. Once they've reestablished their safety, they need to be able to retell their story, reconnect with their community, and have that community repair the harm that they've experienced. The Climate Disaster Project's journalism supports these last 3 stages of trauma recovery, so we can cultivate the conditions for a whole of society response to the impacts and inequities of a warming world. Our students work with survivors to retell their stories and document them as first-person testimonies, because we know that these kinds of testimonies in an era where experience is more important than the evidence are more effective at reconnecting survivors with their communities. And they are more effective at increasing community support for actions that repair the harms of climate change. We then investigate the problems and solutions survivors identify in their testimonies, because we know that this kind of reporting can force action by governments. And we train students to do this work in a trauma-informed way, because when journalists report on these kinds of traumas, they often take control away from survivors who have already experienced such a profound loss of control, inflicting a second wound. So our students learn how to give back control to survivors when they document and investigate these stories, publishing the results with major news media outlets, and collaborating with artists to bring our journalism to diverse audiences. In doing so, our newsroom isn't just rewriting the story that we tell about climate change from a problem that only the powerful can solve to a problem that we can solve together. We are also changing who gets to author that story. And this is what that story sounds like, as told by Suzanne Kilroy-Hukelak, palliative care worker who was evacuated during the 2021 BC forest fire season and shared these words with me.
What brings me hope is prayers in our own rocks, our own medicines we pick from the land. What brings me hope is the teachings on and hold up your drum and just shout and la, 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 and just say, I'm not scared, I'm here and I'm not gonna give up. I'm Suzanne Kilroy and I'm Indigenous woman and I'm an Indian princess. I'm not gonna give up. I'll hold my medicines and I say to the world, I'm gonna carry on. As long as I'm breathing, I'm gonna not give up. I'm gonna do my part and carry on. We pick buffalo seeds and sweet grass and sing and we dance and we drum and we say to the world, respect our lands. What gives me hope is this medicine, my grandma's prayers, that our children would be there. And that's what's going to carry our life on. Medicines, prayer, people.
So on behalf of the survivors, students, and educators of the Climate Disaster Project, I want to thank you for listening to this story, because we know that these kinds of stories can make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. We are roughly halfway through our program and we're running a little bit behind. So I'm going to keep my intermission remarks very brief. We'll have a chance to sort of summarize at the end of the program, but it's clear that we've seen some recurrent themes here, themes of urgency and agency, as I alluded to at the very beginning. We've seen that in so much of what's been presented. Intergenerational connectedness, the importance of communities, human rights, trauma, and a recurrent theme, we're not alone. Again, connectiveness and communities. I did want to comment on one specific presentation very briefly, Jessica's presentation and the Science Moms commercial, which is so powerful because that connection between parents and children, it just carries such moral authority. I think it's such an important way for us to communicate the threat of climate change. And I really enjoyed watching that commercial during the Super Bowl. And not just because our Eagles were trouncing their opponents, Kansas City, but because of the mainstream message and the millions of people that commercial reached, and the fact that I actually recognized several of the mothers as members of that project. Some of them I know and have worked with. So powerful stuff. Without further ado, we continue with our program.
Hello, my name is Lina Torres, and this is the story of people trying to cross over. Es la historia de 10 años construyendo un puente entre comunidades indígenas y locales y espacios de toma de decisión. The real story is not really fitted to a Pechacucha presentation. It's more fitted to an opera with acts and scenes, really high and low ones, tears, sweat, and lots of translators. In 2016, I started collaborating with a group of Indigenous peoples that noticed something odd. Most decisions affecting the forests they inhabited and protected were being made in places they rarely had access to. They created a coalition named the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, composed of representatives from the largest tropical forests in the world. They also had a clear set of demands: a halt to the killing of environmental defenders, access to free, prior, and informed consent, land rights, recognition of their ancestral knowledge, and direct access to climate funding. But they wanted to be invited. They wanted to cross over from their communities to the highly guarded halls of COPs and climate weeks. And they needed a platform to advocate and take on the space they deserve. First, we built a brand. We co-designed a visual identity that took on the concept of a superhero logo and a name that would go with it. They are the guardians of the forest. To position this brand, we then developed high visibility activations that would bring these real life heroes close to our audiences. During the COP21 in Paris, for example, we did a paddle in the Seine River. Then for COP23 in Bonn, a bus tour across 9 European cities. In each city, we had a photo ops, media briefings, meetings, yes, like rock stars. To do this, we work with a whole ecosystem of organizations, media agencies, storytellers, and documentalists. During these 10 years, the communities went from being invisible to being demanded, from kings and heads of states to celebrities and artists. The Global Alliance of Territorial Communities has now a public profile that builds in their international visibility to leverage local advocacy wins. Back in their countries, people know these communities have powerful friends. Sonia Guajajara was appointed as the first Minister of Indigenous Peoples in Brazil. Nemonte Nemkimo named the most influential person of the year by Time magazine. Shai Surui gave the keynote speech at the COP in Glasgow. Mina Cetra and Ruka Sumbolingi were recipients of the Scoral Award in 2024. During these 10 years, we learned from the power of a good strategy and a cohesive set of goals that are not adjusting due to the passing trends. We worked on a collaboration that defies borders and languages. We tested countless of online and offline activities and learned how international visibility shields leadership locally. The biggest learning of this process is the power of collectivity. With the Global Alliance, I have learned the hard way that sometimes it is better to move very slow just to make sure everyone is coming over. They know how to walk the talk. Last year, as we collaborated and celebrated the closing of Climate Week, a colleague reflected on the fact that despite working together for over a decade, Ruka and Sonia, Indigenous leaders from Brazil and Indonesia, have never spoken directly, but through translators, Bahasa to English, English to Portuguese, and vice versa. At every meeting, an average of 4 to 8 translators makes possible deliberation processes that are as lengthy as they are rich and inclusive. At every step of the way, the Global Alliance challenged our vision of effective communications. No matter how important the meeting, campaign, or opportunity, they wanted collective visibility or no visibility at all. Last year, we reflected on this collective power once again. The Guardians of the Forest brand was solid and recognized, but was leaving others behind. The leadership of the Indigenous movement insisted on positioning other biomes such as Cerrado and Pantanal and coastal ecosystems. It was clear that this movement was not only about the forests, but about a vision for a future that is viable and enjoyable. A future that has to be guarded not only for environmental destruction, but from hyper-individualism, overconsumption, and spiritual disconnect. In a new phase, under the Guardians of Tomorrow brand, this alliance aims to continue building a robust bridge across two worlds, leveraging improved visibility and shared power to protect the lives and the livelihoods of those who protect our future on this planet. Thank you.
Hello, Climate Storytellers Summit. My name is Shrish.
And my name is The Rock.
We are both seniors at Livermore High School in Livermore, California, and we're here today to share our climate story.
Our journey of making a difference started during our sophomore year. We helped start what has grown into the Tri-Valley Youth Climate Action Program, sponsored by Quest Science Center. It has now grown to a team of over 50 student interns from over 7 schools. Today, we're here to share our heat mapping story.
Our story is one of resilience and progress in our hometown of Livermore, which has been affected by rising heat over the past few years due to climate change.
Livermore is heating up, and the data proves it. But for us, this isn't just about the data. It's something personal. Today, we're sharing how our youth-led heat mapping project demonstrates that citizen scientists anywhere can collect meaningful climate data and create positive change in their own communities.
We grew up here. We felt the increasingly sweltering summers, and we've seen the impacts firsthand. But how do you turn that feeling into an action?
This isn't just our story. Across Livermore, people face heat disparities daily, especially in vulnerable communities. But a satellite map like the one on the screen just didn't show the whole picture.
Cities can't fix what they can't measure. And the fact was that there was no ground heat data for Livermore, making it hard to address the issue and implement solutions.
Heat mapping requires sensors to record temperature variations that reveal how factors like tree cover and asphalt can affect urban heat.
So we took action. The TVYCAP launched the first community-driven heat mapping project in Livermore. The result, an overwhelmingly impactful youth-led project that is inspiring climate action in the community. It took Livermore citizens from being overwhelmed to feeling more positive.
So we deployed custom-built sensors that we developed over the summer, combining to record heat at different times and locations. After collecting data and formulating a report, we're working with the city of Livermore to help the most vulnerable communities.
A group of students and local partners came together. This was a youth-led project from start to finish.
Before this project, heat disparities were a guess. Now we had hard and concrete data showing where and why heat was worst.
And guess what? We found temperature differences of up to 14 degrees Fahrenheit between neighborhoods. In the hottest areas, low income and less green space.
Heat isn't just uncomfortable, it's deadly. Vulnerable groups are at the highest risk, and we need real solutions.
And like the stars aligning, the city of Livermore has also recognized the heat issue and declared it one of their climate missions to fight these heat issues in Livermore.
Although Livermore has the solutions, like planting trees, starting community relief centers, and painting roofs white, they just don't have the data.
So right now, we're working with city officials, including the sustainability manager and the assistant city manager. We provide data on urban heat islands, so they can focus their resources on areas they know are impacted.
Imagine a Livermore where every neighborhood has shade, cool spaces, and protection from extreme heat.
Our project is just one piece of the puzzle. Any city can use this model to map and mitigate urban heat.
Data informs, but stories inspire. People act when they feel connected, and climate storytelling can turn science into action. By combining technical data with personal narratives, we created a compelling case for change that resonates with both policymakers and community members.
So what can you do? You can advocate for tree planting. You can push for citywide heat mapping. And most importantly, raise awareness. Every voice counts.
This is our climate story. In a time of doom and gloom climate happenings, we hope to provide a spark of hope that can light a change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't always think of myself as a storyteller. I'm a pretty quiet person and usually prefer to be behind the scenes. But in my role as a research and communications fellow at Climate Central, I spend my days supporting climate storytelling. I work with designers, scientists, researchers, and writers on a program called Climate Matters that supported over 12,000 data-driven climate stories in 2024. So even though a lot of us here don't spend much of our time at all talking directly to audiences, all of my coworkers are fabulous climate storytellers. We just work backstage. Climate storytelling has room for and actually requires people with lots of different strengths and energies beyond the people actually telling the stories. I want to talk a little bit about the story of the work under the surface that supports local data-driven climate reporting. Climate change information is lacking in the media, especially TV, even though we have all the ingredients in science, data, and experts. These ingredients aren't making their way to audiences nearly as much as they should or as much as audiences want. The Climate Matters program at Climate Central seeks to address this by bringing these elements together. Each week, Climate Matters distributes free, science-based climate reporting resources, including graphics and data that are localized to around 250 cities across the US and a network of about 3,000 broadcast meteorologists and journalists, who then amplify this information by passing it to their already established local audiences. This model of working with broadcast meteorologists and journalists as trusted messengers or people known by a community to be sources of accurate, worthwhile information works. Peer-reviewed research shows that localized climate reporting by TV weathercasters can enhance the public's understanding of climate change as a local problem. But Climate Matters itself only works because we have a team with varied strengths. We need people with a contagious energy who are awesome at energizing and building partnerships, but we equally need those of us with a more quiet but still powerful fire to relentlessly dig into details of science and design, hunt down and steward data, and think about language. To support local data-driven climate storytelling, we need to make connections. Of course, we need to make connections with the people who we want to empower to tell these stories. This is an ongoing process of education, listening to what this audience needs, building trust, and generally maintaining strong relationships with these messenger partners. But we also connect with other people doing behind-the-scenes work. I've connected with external scientists whose expertise ranges from fall leaf phenology to climate resilience in the cocoa industry. Both connections with these trusted messengers and connections with science people, data people, and more help to set up our work supporting data-driven climate storytelling. But these partnerships only work if we have quality, usable content for our partners. Producing Climate Matters requires focused, quiet work and internal collaboration, which is my favorite part to contribute to. This is where those of us with a more reserved but still strong energy are needed. Our analysts search for data sets, develop processes, and run analyses for our 250 cities. Writers and researchers condense complex scientific topics into simple, digestible language. Our designer visualizes data and concepts in clear, simple formats, considering the ways that people will consume this information. This production process requires relentless effort. To support as wide a range of stories as possible, Climate Matters publishes 50 times per year. And this committed and sustained attention is one of the biggest strengths of the Climate Matters team. Finally, we give this content to our partners and continue to support them with interviews in our internal expertise. So a lot of the work that goes into a local data-driven climate story is behind the scenes. Climate Matters does this work to empower storytellers to tell stories that they might not have the capacity to tell if they had to do it all on their own. Work behind the stage is vital for all kinds of storytelling and for local stories of climate change. These efforts also empower people like me who have a drive to contribute to the public's understanding of climate change, but don't really want to be the person with the microphone.
So, at the risk of verging on cliche, I'm putting out a call for the quiet kids, data nerds, design lovers, science people to see a place for themselves in communicating about climate change, even if they don't want to be center stage. Thank you.
I always thought that I understood glaciers. Snow piles up for eons, compacts into ice, ice slides downhill and carves a valley, sometimes crumbling at the ocean's edge. That's all true, but I didn't realize how little I knew about glaciers until I spent 6 hours walking on Root Glacier in Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I joked that I had sunburn on the roof of my mouth because the light was reflecting up from the glacier that I walked on. There were crevasses with walls over our heads, but we could stretch our arms out and touch both sides. I finally understood where the ice blue crayon got its name. A rumbling sound leads you to a moulin, a giant hole in the ice that goes all the way to the bottom of the glacier, and meltwater pouring down the sides of that hole lubricates the movement of the icy conveyor belt across the landscape. But my favorite, I didn't even know that was a thing though, were nickel and quarter-size holes in the surface of the glacier, just an inch or two in diameter, filled with clear, cold water. Each of them had a little patch of black sand and tiny rocks at the bottom. Cryoconite holes are formed when bits of dark sand blown or tracked onto the glacier warm up in the sun and melt the ice. At night, the water refreezes, and the next day it remelts, and slowly these pinhole-sized lakes coalesce into larger holes that look like eyes staring up at me from this giant inanimate being called a glacier. I thought of all of this recently when I realized that I'd soon be turning 60. And I always celebrate big milestones with a trip. I would love to go to the Galapagos or on an African safari, but I really want to see Antarctica. It would be the most expensive trip ever, but travel's what I've been saving for the past 40 years. I began my research, paddling among icebergs, jumping into near-freezing water, and even camping in a hand-dug depression in the ice are all possibilities. So are whales and leopard seals, and of course penguins. My happy feet fantasies, though, were cut short. Emperor penguins aren't in the areas that ships can get to. Your ship has to have a helicopter, and helicopters are disrupting the birds' behavior. I don't even get close to rookeries of common birds here in South Florida. Why would I fly a gigantic noisemaker towards birds that can't get away? The more I looked, the more I learned. Whales are thick down there, and ships have to slow their course when they spot them to avoid hitting them. But what about the ones the crew doesn't see? People speak of Antarctica's overwhelming silence, a silence that is becoming more and more rare due to ships and helicopters and now even planes. And then I read that soot from these ships is darkening the brilliance of the white ice, absorbing the sun's heat and melting the surface of the continent. This is not some theoretical concept. I had seen this in the cryoconite holes on Root Glacier. And I knew the most important thing I could do to protect Antarctica was not go. It's a first world problem for sure, I know that. And if I was really good, I'd go all Greta Thunberg and not use fossil fuels to get anywhere. But I am an imperfect environmentalist. I do try to limit my impact on the planet. I minimize single-use plastics. I have a yard full of native plants, and the big one, I've never had a child. In another 30 years or so, I'm gone. End of the line, no more Bremens. I could just say screw it. Why should I care about future generations? But I do. It's just my nature. I'm not quitting travel though. Next month, since I just turned 60, I'm going to Europe. And it is a transatlantic flight. But once there, I'm putting on my hiking boots to walk the Portuguese Camino de Santiago. People walk those hundreds of miles for many reasons. Almost all say it is transformational. It is not Antarctica, but who knows? Maybe I'll look down at that trail and see something else that will change the way I look at the world. Just like I did when I walked atop Root Glacier in Alaska and saw it looking back.
And I'm the director of the Oral History Lab at the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about our work in climate storytelling. Hurricane Maria made landfall in the Puerto Rican archipelago in September 2017, leaving almost total destruction in its wake. When the university reopened just 2 weeks afterwards, I began a 2-semester disaster pedagogy project that situated oral history as mutual aid. In those courses, I listened to the many stories our students shared. Alejandra, for example, wrote that her saddest experience was to see her neighbors digging graves in their backyard because relatives had passed away due to the lack of medical attention in Aguadilla, since the only hospital there had to be shut down and the electricity remained off. I began to contemplate the importance of sharing stories as a form of mutual aid. These courses resulted in a book, a zine, a children's book, and a contribution to an international traveling exhibition, my first forays into climate communication. When the Oral History Lab was formalized in 2022, we were able to bring together the Department of English, University Library, and Film Certificate Program in a way that allowed us to conceptualize our projects from interview to preservation through dissemination, and we were able to add to our program by including documentary filmmaking. We've also expanded our work in digital humanities by using Omeka-S subsites to curate conversations on mutual aid after disaster. We are experimenting with community archiving and developing listening stations. Pictured here is Laurel Cubano Santiago, the organizer of the Colectivo Perlarte Community Arts Center in La Perla, an underserved oceanfront neighborhood in San Juan that was founded as a way to keep first enslaved peoples and then servants housed outside of the wall of the now famous fort San Felipe del Morro. In her interview, Laurel told us, La Perla is coveted now. This is prime real estate. In 2012, Donald Trump came here. He wanted to buy the land to turn this into a Santorini. If no help comes here, people are hoping that it just becomes abandoned so they can buy it up. It is abandoned by design. This quote from Laurel's interview led us to develop a community storytelling and archiving project in La Perla, in which we supported members of Perlarte as they interviewed long-term residents as a means of establishing the contemporary history of the neighborhood to fight gentrification. One of the themes present in these interviews were the folk tales unique to this area, and the Perlarte artist in residence painted this mural on the side of their center using elements from all of the stories that were shared in those interviews. The mural has embedded QR codes so that visitors may link directly to the full interview recordings. At the lab, we have a commitment to producing integrated high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech public-facing outputs so as to serve multiple stakeholder audiences both in Puerto Rico and beyond. And so we made a short documentary film on the process of painting the mural that also has excerpts from the interviews. And I'll just show you a short clip from this film.
And it's worth it to give them a face, to put value to the history of the community, and that to me is going to help us establish a barrier for gentrification.
Currently, we are theorizing how to disseminate disaster narratives and climate stories through multimodal public-facing outputs. We are listening to climate stories as qualitative community-based data sets, curating narratives for STEM-focused researchers, responders, and policymakers, educating students and community members on how to tell their own stories and amplify the stories of others. And we are serving as a resource hub for other projects in Puerto Rico, the Caribbean archipelago, and the world. One of the most important things we've learned in our projects is that it's essential to remember that because of histories of colonialism and environmental racism, There can be no successful recovery from the climate crisis that is not a just recovery. And so it's crucial that climate communication is co-created with impacted frontline communities in ways that work to undermine a history of silencing so that we can all move forward together to just futures. Thank you.
I want to start with a simple question for you. Do you recognize what family this is? And now, can you tell me what bee this is? While I too love The Simpsons, in 2018, the bee was named the most important living creature. Yet, almost none of us are able to recognize species like the southeastern blueberry bee. As a kid, we all have this intrinsic love for nature, just waiting to be explored when we have our first nature experience. For me, it was the sparrow. This one sparrow that would come to my window and sing sweet lullabies to me. As a baby, I would laugh when she would come peck. My mom tells me she was the first bird I ever saw, visiting me the day I was born, and coming back since. She says she was like a second mother, or my amma, sent by the gods and checking in on me to make sure I was safe. I know that most people in the West know Delhi as the most polluted city in the world. But to me, it was my home. What I didn't know at the time, though, was that it is also the second most bird populous city in the world. I had inklings, the sparrow first, then the family of hornbills that moved in next door, the night owl that screeched right before my bedtime. I would spend hours waking up before school started on my balcony, cosplaying as an ornithologist. My parents started taking me to national parks on holidays, and the songs of birds finally started waking me up in the morning, rather than the screams of my human mother. And in all this, my sparrow was with me throughout. But one day, the birds stopped singing, and the sparrow stopped visiting. The air wasn't silent. I could still hear countless traffic horns, but no birds. I remember waking up to a gray sky outside my window. Even if the sparrow was there, I couldn't see her. I could only see black and sooty, smoky air. I coughed and coughed to the point of having to go to the doctor while my school was shut. Delhi was shut, but on an emergency lockdown due to pollution. I never saw her again, but I did see this pollution emergency without fail, year by year. What was her fault? What was mine? The more I fell in love with nature, the more it broke my heart to see that we were contributing to pollution events and fueling global climate change. I knew I had to do something, but what? What could a little kid sitting on his phone in India possibly do to protect the species around him? Well, I decided to share my backyard discoveries with the world and started posting them online through the only medium I knew, photography. They say a photograph speaks 1,000 words. I say a photo evokes 1,000,000 emotions. How could I explore this emotional intersection of the wonders of nature and the mindset of humanity? I realized my images could be anything: a love letter, a prayer, a warning. I don't just photograph wildlife, I photograph absence. The ache of what's changing, the quiet mourning of a wing that no longer returns for the summer. Through my lens, I try to show people what I was seeing. This dual sense of beauty and loss. What is and what was. The fragility of ecosystems, but also their endurance. And slowly, this community grew to over 900,000 people following my work on social media. So every time you see a photo of mine, I want you to ask yourself, is this the last time I see this creature? And then think, what can I do to save it? To all of you wanting to take action, use your skills. Whether you're a painter, a writer, or a corporate employee, use your work to include some form of climate storytelling. I think we can only effectively practice climate storytelling if we speak from the heart. Personal stories, cultural values, stories from childhood. I had to recognize that my grief isn't mine alone. The silence left by birds disappearing due to climate change is shared. A child in India misses it, and a biologist in Kenya studies it, while a grandfather in Canada remembers it. But that's the magic of climate storytelling. We are different, but our stories overlap. Your stories, they can cross borders and connect you with people across the globe. I promise, if it moves you, it will move someone else. And that's where change begins. Not with data alone, but with feelings. For me, it was the 500 bird species of my home Delhi. What is it for you? When you get your answer, go out there, use your talents, and write that story. Your climate story.
Thank you for having me at this event. I wanted to start with a small fact that you may or may not know, that out of the entire global population of 8 billion people, 3.8 billion are young people under 30 years old. And out of this huge number, 80% live in the global south. That, my friends, is the population of China and India combined. My name is Vanessa. I'm the co-founder of the Livism Instagram account. And I'm here today to talk about our Global South Stories project, an initiative that amplifies the voices of Global South content creators. And this project was born after we realized that despite the majority of young people living in the Global South, Global North content creators disproportionately dominated the social media landscape. And this contributed to creating a very unbalanced and biased narrative of the climate crisis that often ignored the most affected. And at its core, creating this account, it's about representation. It's about the stories that are being shared, who's being heard, and ultimately about giving back control of the narrative. And because if you are not represented, then you're unable to reach the point where you have power and are considered as an influential group. The Livism Instagram account is a young account. And it started only a year and a half ago. It came out of this need of representing Global South people, Global South stories to Global South people. And you must be wondering how we do it. We invite Global South content creators from different countries, so they can, in the Global South, so they can come and share their stories through videos from their own unique perspective. Since we began, we've worked with people from Kenya, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Nigeria, and the Solomon Islands. And our next content creators are lined up, and they are from Brazil and Senegal. What we've noticed since we started is that character-driven stories generate the strongest engagement. People connect deeply with real individuals facing real challenges, real life challenges. And through their different perspectives, we've been able to tell the climate crisis stories with its impacts, but also its solutions. And this fosters a sense of community and inspires collective action. In the Instagram sections comment, we can see how people engage and how they feel related to the stories. And even the followers, they also feel connected to each other. And this creates, again, this sense of togetherness, because representation in storytelling is not just about the visibility, but about belonging. We can see also the results in the engagement rate. We have almost 7%, which is good compared to other accounts with the same amount of followers. And we were able to grow the community by 2,000% since the project started. And this has been a truly rewarding experience. I've learned a lot through this process, including the importance of having a very clear editorial approach and participative one, robust feedback, so we can hear back from the content creators, and the power of independent storytelling, of giving them the freedom, the space to be creative, to decide which stories they will tell and using what angle. Another very important learning is that we need to consider the challenges they face. Our storytellers face extreme weather events, internet disruptions, and they face also threats for speaking up. So we need also sometimes to let go of some rigid structures we have when working with content creators and just embrace flexibility. Storytelling has massively evolved in the last few years, and we've been seeing more and more of it, which is great. But it's been proven time and again that who tells the story matters as much as the story itself. And when we have the right story at the right time with the right messenger, then we're on our way to creating action. Thank you.
My name's Toby Smith, and I've got 18 years experience in producing and using editorial photography. as an impactful tool for environment and social change on local and global narratives. I'd like to share some project case studies and experiences that I hope anyone using photography for climate storytelling can emulate. So I spent much of my early career on the ground, near and far, as a photojournalist for global media. Focused on real-world impact, I quickly learned that collaboration can be all-powerful. This story on illegal rosewood trade from Madagascar saw my images published widely, work as a toolkit for NGOs, evidence for the US Fisheries and Wildlife Service, which led to the successful prosecution of Gibson guitars in Madagascar. But fatherhood and a frustration with the values and ethics of the media industry caused me to ask some hard truths as to how effective I was. Does the world need another stereotype? Another white European photographer parachuting in to make content for Western media on a strict time budget? I was lucky, given an opportunity to step back so I could reflect and use that privilege and experience to make a shift into being a strategist, fundraiser, and co-designer on larger projects than my own work. Plus sourcing, commissioning, and sharing photography from closer to the story, often in country and local if you can. Working at Climate Visuals was also an opportunity to consider the evidence as to what really makes effective content with different audiences, and using that evidence base to challenge the media gatekeepers. Furthermore, I'd encourage you to listen to others, generate new research and guidelines for all communicators, share your knowledge. How can we be movement generous rather than working on exclusive assignment terms? And I'd actively encourage commissioners and photographers to think the same way. I realized quite quickly that having an inside understanding and ability to positively disrupt photography, social media, distribution, algorithms, and public engagement could be more valuable. You might have insights and become more unique than simply producing more content for the machine. Think about boosting the reach and impact of content of others across media, or guerrilla tactics to level up with corporate ad spend, for citizens, for climate action and climate justice. But photography is a really rapidly evolving medium, especially with AI, but it's still a universal language, universally appreciated and largely trusted. Its simplicity, value, and potential as a communication and policy tool is relatively untapped still, in my opinion. How can creatives, rather than compete with each other with reduced budgets, find rich interdisciplinary space across sectors, team up to move hearts and minds? In 2023, I took a big leap of faith into a new country and context, joining the Belfast Photo Festival as a director of development. It's an innovative, nimble, and effective organization that over 10 annual festivals, despite COVID, has specialized in bringing international work to Northern Ireland, powerfully showing exhibitions in open spaces, not exclusive white cubes, to folks not normally engaged in arts, culture, or environment, those outside the green bubble. As a quick, humble context, there's a rising tide of public engagement with climate and environment in Northern Ireland, yet competing politics and social issues and regulatory deadlock has meant we're a bit behind much of Europe on climate awareness action. So what an opportunity for intelligent engagement with the media. So in this context, we co-designed and convened with advisory partners from across conservation, campaign, and environment groups, not neglecting academia or policy scientists, to listen, learn, build, and raise funds for a modest but scaled project to address real needs entitled Visualizing Northern Ireland's Natural Heritage. Guess what the project's going to do? We're delighted to be underway, funded to the tune of £140,000, just over 180,000 US. For the fundraisers or designers among you, it's equally split between organizational overheads, commissioning of photography, but importantly, exhibiting and promoting their work to have legacy. In the background, you can see Joe Laverty's work on the crisis of toxic algae of Loch Ness. But rather than narrate what I can see in the images, they're going to serve, I hope, as an attractive background to a few tips I'm going to leave you with. What works, what doesn't? Flexible concepts that I hope anyone can use. I'd like you to co-design, collaborate, decentralize the design and leadership, focusing on the impact you want media to have. Find the rich space between sectors and the funding, between creative, campaign, science, and media. Identify lack of representation and the lack of quality in your field and aim to fix that, not just producing more content. Go even deeper when underway. Work with local experts and creatives. Drop the egos. Work with photographers and communicators that are story and access driven. Pick your visual battles. Not all stories have a visual component. I love and know photography's strengths, but critically know its weaknesses too. Too abstract stories, too process driven, drop it. Focus on a shot list, the things you need. Be inspired, but not distracted by aesthetic beauty. Don't look too far into the past, maybe stay in the present. It's as close to the future as most photography can get. Be representative, gender balanced, and lived experiences really matter. Be positive in telling stories. Let a subject or a story depict itself. What does a community or individual need from your work? Show real people. And when you're with them, seek true informed consent. So the sitter or landowners are on your side and want to be published, not wanting to litigate afterwards. But importantly, design legacy and community power into photography projects. I'm proud in Northern Ireland that it's the communities themselves are steering the exhibitions, where they're published, and in sometimes permanently installed for decades. But it's photography, it's an art form. It's okay to enjoy the journey and the challenge. No one said it was going to be easy. But look, you know who I am now. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need a little help along the way. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susie Hicks, and I have the amazing job of talking about sparking climate action with kids media. So I am going to start with a little bit of a poll. When did you first learn about climate change? How old were you? Were you in school? Was it on the news? Think about the first time it really entered your consciousness. Then I want you to think about how it made you feel. Did you feel excited or scared or happy or sad? What emotions came up for you? And then finally, and I promise this is relevant, who was a childhood hero of yours? All of this comes together because I, as a kid, was really inspired by Steve Irwin. And the way that Steve Irwin loved the earth inspired me to love the earth as well. And so I grew up to become a kids media maker. I'm a children's author, and a climate activist, and a teacher. And so here are some pictures of my work. I work at my local PBS kids station, but I also have my own show about climate change called Susie Hicks, the Climate Chick and Sprout. And our show is about local climate issues meeting local climate solutions by highlighting role models so that kids can see people that they can look up to who are taking collective climate action, and they can also see jobs that they could have in the future. It ties science inquiry and social emotional learning and music together to give kids climate literacy and the ability to regulate their emotions and see how they can take climate action together. We were just featured on All Things Considered 2 days ago on NPR. So if you want more information, go check it out there. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the landscape of kids media and climate science. So setting the stage, children are being actively impacted by climate change today. This is not an earth that they're inhabiting or that they're inheriting. This is the earth that they're inhabiting right now. But there's a gap. Families are not talking about it, and most school districts do not require curriculum about it. And so there is a deep need for climate education and climate literacy, but there isn't a lot of content out there. And a lot of teachers aren't teaching climate because they don't have the access to the materials. And so when I'm creating my materials, my educational materials, I ask myself 3 questions. What information needs to be communicated? What emotional impacts will it have? And how can we engage our audience in collective engagement afterwards? I wrote my thesis on ecophobia, which is a term that means kids looking at environmental destruction and saying, oh, I actually don't want to learn about that. That's too much. So when we talk about issues like climate change, we need to understand how it's going to affect our audiences and how we can engage our audiences to make real change. So in modern media right now, most of the media that focuses on climate talks about what's happening and why it matters. But that's not the whole story. We need to zoom out and talk about what caused it, what's happening, why it matters, but also what's being done about it and how you can get involved. And so my job as a climate educator and a climate media maker is to highlight solutions and stories of togetherness. And that's what we do in the show. So my main thesis of the work that I do is that kids media has the opportunity to be a healthy intervention point to increase climate literacy and equip young people with the tools to tackle the climate crisis together. So here are a couple of do's and don'ts about communicating climate change to early learners. The first one is highlight solutions. You don't want to hear about a big problem and not hear that we're trying to solve it. The second one is include a call to action. See how kids can get involved. Go to the library, find your local garden, understand how your house is getting energy. Focusing on togetherness. We don't need to highlight only individual action. This is a collective issue. It's going to have collective solutions. And finally, make it intersectional. Climate change isn't happening in a vacuum. And if we are going to collectively support the planet, we need to collectively support everyone on it. Now, here's some don'ts. The first one is lead with guilt. Kids just got here. It's not their job to fix the entire system that has been broken for years. The next one is promote only individual action. I recycled batteries all the time as a kid, and climate change still got worse. The next one is trash humanity at large. Indigenous people lived sustainably for thousands of years. We don't need to say that all humans are bad. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we can fix them. And finally, don't prophesize the future. We're still writing it every day, and we can write it in a way that's way more positive than right now. Awesome. So I'm going to give you a quick sneak peek at the show just for a couple of seconds. This is our original song called Bright Future, and it comes out in 2 weeks. So this isn't even on the internet yet. All right, we're going to go here.
Oh, bright. If we use water, wind, earth, and sunlight, we will be all right. Our future is, yeah, our future is so bright. Susie.
Awesome. So that is our show. You can find it on YouTube. And I will just leave you with these statements. The climate crisis is a huge problem, but we are born problem solvers. And in the great process of problem solving, there is room for fun and there is room for joy. And everyone has something to offer and everyone has something to learn. Thank you all so much. Please keep in touch. You can find me at Susie Hicks Climate Shake on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube at Susie and Sprout. And reach out. I love getting to meet everyone, and I'm really grateful to be a part of this. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, I'm Anirudh Thabatia. I'm a scientist at the Rare Entertainment Lab, and I'm going to talk to you about how climate stories impact audiences at home. And okay, so climate storytelling has really captured the zeitgeist. We see tons of media attention, we see industry buy-in, we see a groundswell of enthusiasm from creative professionals, whether that's script writers or set designers or showrunners, to include climate solutions in big ways and small in the entertainment we already know and love. But critically, what we're seeing is audiences are on board. In study after study that we've run, we see 7 in 10 Americans want more climate-friendly behaviors on screen, specifically in order to inspire large-scale climate action. But does it matter? And by that, I mean, does it matter beyond documentaries? And to answer that question, I'm going to bring some evidence from a case study that we ran using a TV show called Madam Secretary, and specifically an episode called The New Normal. Okay, I absolutely love this episode. I'm very partial. It is a hard-hitting episode, it is fast-paced drama, and it features climate as central to its storyline. There is a climate-fueled super typhoon on its way to hit a coral island nation in the Pacific called Nauru, and the Secretary of State has to figure out a way to relocate the entire population before the typhoon gets there. It touches on climate justice, touches on climate migration, it touches on government action, and the role and responsibility of high-emitting nations like the US. And so, since we wanted to know how viewing such a storyline would impact audiences, what we did was run a randomized controlled trial. Participants were either asked to randomly assigned to either watch the climate episode or the episode right prior. And because we were interested in the impact over time, we measured people at 4 points. 3 days prior to viewing to get a baseline measure, immediately after viewing, 3 days later, or 10 to 15 days later. Well, what did we find? Okay. So immediately after viewing, we see a big boost in climate concern. That's both in terms of the perceived threat that climate change poses, the severity of that threat, and also worry about how climate change might impact me, my family, and my community. We also see increase in support for government action to combat climate change. But the part that sticks out to me is this bottom set of variables. Let's consider them dimensions. The reason I find these variables particularly interesting is, one, they're really hard to move. And what we saw was that when people watched this episode, it boosted their belief in the unequal impacts of climate change across a bunch of unequal impacts of climate change across nations. It increased support for compensating vulnerable countries. Think of this as climate reparations. It increased their support for accepting climate migrants and for providing both emergency aid and creating a resilience fund to help at-risk nations protect themselves. Now, these are really hard to message on issues. These are boring, dry, difficult, abstract issues. And what we see here, and why I really love this, is the unique power of entertainment. Through character and storyline, we can bring these abstract issues up close and personal and let people feel the suffering and the actual risk that people in distant countries are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Okay, that was immediately after viewing. Well, what about over time? So there was a dip 3 days after viewing, but the good news is even 10 to 15 days later, a lot of those climate justice variables were still elevated relative to baseline. So what we see is not only do we see an impact immediately after viewing, but that impact persists for at least 10 to 15 days later. And the part that really excites me, the odds of self-identifying as a single issue climate voter were 3 times higher immediately after viewing and twice as high even 10 days later. Okay, so that was the case study. Can we step back and generate some abstract principles about what good storytelling or good climate storytelling or impactful climate storytelling should do? Okay, one, if you're gonna have characters, you may as well have them do climate-friendly actions. Whether that's driving an EV or eating plant-rich or installing solar, audiences at home notice what characters are doing on screen and use that as a cue for what they think is normal, expected, and where the future is headed. Break some stereotypes. Climate action is for absolutely everyone. So make sure that the people taking climate action in your stories look like the diverse world we inhabit and let audiences at home see themselves on screen. There's no one reason to engage with climate. It is an intersectional issue, whether it's protecting your children, whether it is protecting your neighborhood, or whether it's the fight for racial justice. Pick the pathway that resonates with your audience, but most critically, pick the pathway that is authentic to the character that you're writing. And finally, don't feel the need to write perfect characters. Hypocrisy is the price of entry. Show your characters struggling and let them fight to overcome barriers. When we see other people struggling and overcoming barriers, it makes us feel like we can do it too. The last thing I'd like to leave you with is that entertainment and impact are not in conflict. Quite the contrary. Entertainment value is critical to impact. Stories that transport us and characters that we fall in love with are the pathways to impact and changing the climate story that we have inhabited. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. We covered a lot of ground. As I said before, there are certain clear recurring themes here, like connectiveness and togetherness, things that bring us together, connections between our past and our future. We saw the importance of both hope and disaster narratives. That's urgency and agency once again. Over and over, we heard about the importance of providing a path forward, providing hope, inspiration, climate solutions messaging. We saw a diversity of approaches to storytelling, from photography to film to music to online media and video games, TV and film entertainment, citizen science, recounting of personal stories from our youth or our past, humor, satire, dark humor. A few things sort of stood out for me. Aman talked literally about the birds and the bees while growing up in Delhi. Vanessa, her comment, who tells the story matters as much as the story itself. There's no one messenger who's going to win this battle for us. We need a diversity of messengers, diverse in every sense, culturally diverse, ethnically and racially diverse, whose experiences are diverse, if we're going to communicate the true depth of this challenge to the public. Susie Hicks, I loved this presentation about how we reach kids. Obviously, they are the ones who are going to inherit the legacy of the decisions we're making now, but they're not yet in a position to affect policy in the way that we can. And so it's important for us to make sure they're informed about this problem and to do everything we can to encourage action in the meantime. Just a gratuitous plug here. One of my most enjoyable experiences was actually working with a children's author and illustrator, Megan Herbert, on a children's book about climate change called The Tantrum That Changed the World. And, Anirudh, entertainment value is critical. That's such an important message. The more compelling your story, the more potential it has to reach a large audience. So don't be boring, be interesting, be inventive, because you need to be heard, you need to be seen, you need to be read. If you're going to have impact, if we're going to have impact, we have to be inventive. Meredith, I loved her brief mention of don't look up. If you really want to get a kick, Google who inspired Leo DiCaprio's character in that movie. I promise you'll get a kick out of it. Let's see, I think I have about a minute left. I wanted to very briefly tell my own story. I and Samuel talked about the devastating extreme heat in Texas and how that provides an opportunity for people to tell stories about how climate change is directly impacting them. Well, we have our own story of this sort. This is back in June 2017, when we had to rush our daughter, who at the time, I believe she was 11 years old. We had to rush her to the emergency room from our hotel near the Phoenix airport because of an asthma attack that had been triggered by record hot temperatures. You may remember that day in June 2017. It's the day when planes couldn't take off at the Phoenix airport because it was so hot. That's the day where it was so hot that there were record levels of ground level ozone pollution in the atmosphere. And in the middle of the night, we were awakened because our daughter couldn't breathe. We had to rush her to the emergency room. And fortunately, they put her on an inhaler, and in the end, she was okay. But that's when climate change really hit home for me. And that's my climate story.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate hearing about that story. Like Mike said, we all have climate stories. We might not have realized it before, but we all have climate stories. And now the challenge is, how do we share them? I want to thank Mike so much for emceeing, and thank all our climate storytellers for all the work that they put in, their vulnerability, and for sharing their stories, their tips, and their advice. I also want to thank Bethany Wiggin for her support and her work organizing this. With that, Bethany, I think you have a couple things to close us out on.
Well, one of the most powerful things that I've learned, and I think we've all seen, is that when we collaborate together, when we speak together, when we speak up, when we speak out, and when we collaborate, we can build these platforms to amplify individual voices together to make our stories heard. I really want to thank you for being here today. You'll be able to check back in on the website in a couple of weeks. We'll have the videos edited and curated, and we'll have a wealth of additional resources that the individual storytellers have supplied. Many of you watching have made wonderful comments and additions into the Q&A. Those will be added to the resource hub. Check back, check often, and thanks so much for being here. Take care and good night.
Good night.